All right. So, which file types will work content indexing? How about EXEs? No, there's no readable content in there, and it doesn't go in like string. It's text, PDF, text and PDF, and HTML are all plain text files that can read. They can't read EXEs or JPEGs. Those are binary files and don't normally contain any significant amount of readable text. Might be some metadata in a JPEG, although on pings I know have them, and there might be some readable text in an EXE, but it will not be indexed. Right. So which folders are indexed? How about the desktop?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, the desktop's in. How about Windows C? That's just the system stuff you don't want. C Windows?
No.
Temp?
Yes.
No. And app data?
Okay.
App data is not indexed. It's an exception. So on that list, the desktop is the only thing that's indexed by default. We talked about that. App data is typically not user-generated content, and that's all it is. Any place where Microsoft expects you to store your files is indexed. Anything that's supposed to be part of the system or created by programs is not indexed, because they figure the purpose of the fast search is to find your stuff. All right, and if you're delete from these locations, you delete from USB, does it go in the recycle bin? No. You delete from desktop?
Yes.
How about C?
Oh, yes.
Network drive?
No.
No. And inside a zip?
No.
Right. Actually, remember it, because anything that would just make the total amount of storage more on your drive doesn't happen. You have to unzip it to put it in the recycle bin and make it bigger. These things were never on the drive anyway. It's just, and the way it does it is it doesn't even move the sectors. It just changes a pointer in the front of the sector. It just changes a flag saying put this in the recycle bin. That's why it's very fast. All right, any questions? So when a file name turns green, what's that?
It's been encrypted.
It's encrypted. Encrypted with EFS. And which versions include BitLocker?
Ultimate and
Ultimate. Or Ultimate and Enterprise if you want to be picky. In general, when I'm doing these quizzes, I figure if you only answer the commercial versions in America, that's good enough, and that would be Home Premium, Professional, and Ultimate. And Starter. Those are the versions you can buy in America. All right, anyway, out of it all, it's only Ultimate and Enterprise, which is the same thing as Ultimate, and just a different licensing agreement. Any questions? All right, let's charge into the new stuff, which is backup. Shift F5 on Windows hard. Right, so Microsoft has a extensive automatic backup routine available in Windows 7, which is quite trendy these days. Apple's had it for a while with File Vault, and most people don't back up their stuff, and it will nag you and try to make you remember to back up your stuff, which is certainly a good idea, you know, because wherever you store your stuff is subject to destruction. The most likely reason is you will make a mistake and accidentally delete something, but of course your hard drive could fail and your house could burn down, someone could steal your computer, and all these things would make you wish you had a backup somewhere. All versions have backups. The only thing they took out of the home versions was the ability to back up to a network drive, because you probably don't have a network drive at home. So that's pretty reasonable. And system protection is the same in all editions, which is really nice. And all editions can create and restore image backups, which are images of the entire system partition, like what Norton Ghost uses, which is very nice. That is the cat's meow. And if you buy a, that's what I use here. For example, in some of the labs here we have deep freeze, so everything students do will be erased every time it restarts. And I didn't want that in here because we wanted more flexibility for teachers to add things during the semester. So what I did was, I made a local image backup in every one of these machines with an image. So if a student fouls it up, we can just recover it back to its original state in 20 minutes. By the way, that backup is what a lot of people do. It's on the same physical hard drive, so it's not really a very good disaster recovery plan, because if the hard drive fails, I'll lose the backup too. It's just convenient for classroom use. But if you actually want to protect your stuff in the event of the whole computer being destroyed or stolen, or the hard drive failing, then you have to make a backup on something else, like USB drive or a cloud service or something like Dropbox. Anyway, so the backup utilities here, you can create a system image. This will make a one-time backup of your entire system. The system image will do the entire C drive and any other drive you may choose, the entire system drive. And you can set up a schedule, which will make the two kinds of backups on a schedule of your choice. The two kinds of backup being a system image to make the machine start again, and a backup of your files. Those are typically two quite different things. Yeah, and by default it'll do both of them every week, but you can schedule them. They serve entirely different purposes. And that's why I mentioned before, a general good practice is to not even store them on the same partition. You can have the C contain nothing but the operating system and installed programs, and have something else like D or E where you put all your stuff, all your documents and everything. That makes it easier to search, easier to back up, easier to fix the system without losing your data. Anyway, but you can mix them together, and Microsoft assumes you're going to do that and have your stuff in C documents and in C, you know, your profile documents and desktop and such. So the file backup will back up your personal files. The image backup will back up the entire operating system, the entire C partition, so you can get the thing running again if you have some problem like getting infected with malware. A very good recovery system for a malware infection is to just do an image restore. Modern malware is really nasty. It's now pretty clear what's come out. This has been rumored for years, and now I think it's absolutely undeniable that the malware we're dealing with now is military, and largely from the US. But governments have cyber warriors, and they are writing nasty stuff. We are the main offenders, as far as anybody can tell. The US is the most dangerous bunch of hackers, and that stuff leaks out and gets used in the private sector, especially in other countries like China and the Russian republics. The stuff you're getting hit with was designed by the military. It is nasty. It is really hard to get off your machine. I always set a time limit. I'm only going to spend 2 hours trying to clean this and then forget it, restore it from backup. Having a clean system image will save you a ton of bother, because in like 20 minutes you can be back to running machine. Yeah?
Last week you were talking about system restore,
Yeah.
and how it can be unstable.
Yeah, apparently so.
Are the image backups different?
Yes.
Are they completely different?
Yes,
So they are
yes.
stable?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. That's a very important point. Image, because system restore apparently does not really completely roll your system back. Even the files it replaces aren't 100% back to their original state, but an image backup is a complete bit-for-bit copy of the drive, all the active data. By the way, this is a useful thing to know about Apple devices. An iTunes backup of your iPad is not a system image. I thought it was. I jailbroke my iPad. I started putting all this weird stuff, hacking tools and stuff, and Linux, and then eventually I managed to put on such nasty stuff I crashed it, because I've been told, oh, just make an iTunes backup and you can restore it and it'll be fine. And I thought it was this. And then when I restored it, I got a Frankenstein monster that is half old and half new. The Apple backup does not back up the whole drive, not at all. It just backups the important files, in their opinion, and if you jailbroke it, you're changing files off that map and the restore will not restore it. That was a nasty thing to realize. As far as I know, there's no way to make an image backup of your iPad. But you can on Windows. If you make an image backup, you can do anything at all to your machine, sort of physically break the hardware, and you can just restore your image and you're right back to the beginning. So it's very nice. So like I say, if you put it on an internal hard drive, that'll be, yeah.
For the OS, your image backup, does it also store the license key?
Yeah, everything's there, the product key and everything.
So what if you took an image of your computer, then somebody else said, oh, my computer's broken, can you put an image on there? Can you switch the image over to theirs?
You can, but what'll happen is within a month, it will phone home and it'll start saying your product key is no good.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but in fact, that's a perfectly fine way to deploy Windows, and I've done that. You can back up one to a USB, and you can go from machine to machine with a USB drive, putting images on there. It's cheaper than, doesn't scale very well. Ghost is better if you want to do 1,000, but if you want to just fix a couple broken machines, that's a perfectly fine thing to do.
Okay.
Good. Anyway, so, all right, so you back up to external hard drive. This is always great, USB 2 or now USB 3, or FireWire, something fast would be nice. Shared network drive is okay too. And you can, in principle, make backups to CDs or DVDs. I tried this, one of my students tried this in Vista and it didn't work. It said it would work, it was only putting 1 gig on each DVD. But I imagine they probably got the bugs out of it by now. So you can customize your backup if you want to. You can, now the image backup you can't customize, except you can choose to include other partitions. But it's all of C, all of D, all of E, and that's the only choice you get to make. But the file backup will include your files, and you can choose to add other folders to it in case you're storing your files in some strange place, like C, SAM, or something. Then you can choose to include in your backups in the wizard. So in system image backup, it'll let you have disaster recovery, which is very nice. If something horrible happens, your machine won't even boot up anymore, like a terrible malware infection, then you can just restore the image. And you can even buy a new computer and put that image on there and have one just like your old one, like you were saying. All right. Yeah.
Sorry, it was just a little fast, the last
Yeah.
point before that about the
Sure.
so what you said the file backup, there's some of them you can include in your regular backup.
Oh, you can add whatever you want to the file backup. It'll start with the default places Microsoft expects you to put things, like your documents folders and such. And you can choose to add other locations to the file backup.
But this,
But the image backup, You can't change, it's a whole partition.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all.
I don't know why would you try to change that?
No, not for you, but for this one you would, in case you're storing files in some other place.
Yeah.
I've got, put my files someplace that's outside where Microsoft
But
is.
if you had like if you do a boot or something, that's going to be a problem. Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
well, that could be a problem, and you're right, that's an issue. If you have used two operating systems, then maybe you want to back up the files from the other operating system profile or something, that's possible. I guess you can in principle do that. All right, no, I think what they're mostly thinking of is you're running some other application, like you might be running some old photo archiving thing, intended for an earlier version of Windows, that stores the files, like in the old days, you would store the data files, Packet Tracer does this. It stores the data files in the program folder. C program files, Packet Tracer saves. That's the way things used to be around the time Windows 95. You would store the data for the program in the program file in a C program files folder, which is the wrong, that before you had profiles. And if you're using some program like that, then you really do have to include some strange extra location where stuff is going. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of here. Yeah.
I just have one more question about the license.
Yeah.
So can they use their same license that they had on their OS?
Windows will not let you do it. The Windows Phone now phones home and verifies it. In XP and earlier versions, before Windows Genuine Advantage, they didn't check, and people did it, and people would memorize licenses and use them like crazy, and now Microsoft got fed up with that, so it's technically illegal, and Microsoft will actually catch you and bust you now. But all they will do is it'll pop a box saying you may be the victim of software piracy and turn the background black. It won't shut down or quit working or anything.
So can they use the license that came with their computer when
They should be able to, as long as it's the same version of Windows, but it has to be exactly the same version. It can't be like an OEM install, and now you're putting on something that came from Microsoft Academic Alliance or something, which is pretty annoying. Yeah. These are good questions. All right, so here's one thing to ask you about these backups, by the way. If you back up to your hard drive, and then you decide, I want to restore this to another machine, and you copy the files off the hard drive onto a USB, they won't work. I tried that. I felt very ripped off. What you have to do is back up directly to the USB, then pull the plug and move it over. You can't just move the files. And the same thing's true of a network location. Oh, another nasty thing about network locations. If you set up a regular weekly backup to a network location and it starts backing up and fails, you lose your backup because it puts it on top of the old backup. It deletes the old one and puts a new one on top of it in that order. So if you want to make a second backup and keep the old one, you have to point to a different folder next time you back up on the network. That's kind of sleazy. All right, but you can't restore files, thank God. Windows XP had a really, really nasty feature. The Home Edition had a backup wizard that would support making backups, but you couldn't restore from them. Isn't that fun? You thought you had a backup. That's pretty rude. Microsoft didn't do that again. That was downright rude. Anyway, so you restore things the same way. You can back individual files from your file backup. If you want to restore a system image, typically, remember the main reason you do this is your machine is so broken it won't even boot up. So there's nowhere in the menu, restore from system image or anything. You just boot from an install disk. Select the system image and restore. It works very well, but you can't control the process or customize it. It just finds the image and brings it back. And like I say, you can restore to a different computer to make a clone machine. If you restore a system image, your whole C partition will go back. If you've been storing your documents on a C drive, then all your email and documents are going to go back to the way they were before. You'll lose your modern email. So if you're going to do this, first you have to back up your documents, or people will not thank you. This is the same thing. They appear to have addressed this in Windows 8. Windows 8 has some new thing called Refresh My Computer. And it seems to back up your documents, do a restore, and then put your documents back. I don't know exactly how it works. The menu isn't very friendly. But Microsoft has changed this in Windows 8. Like I say, you can restore to different hardware as long as the new hardware has at least as many hard drives and they're at least as large. Even if you think it would work like you had 100 gig with only 10 gigs used, and you try to go back to a 50 gig, and you're only going to use 10 gigs, it will refuse to go. I've certainly done this. You can have different drive controllers and different graphics cards on the new system, and it's just fine. That is something that was not true of Norton Ghost. But it just works fine, which is very nice. All right, you can control how much space is used by backups. There's an opportunity to measure it. Once your backup is set up, it'll tell you how much space is being used, and you can control how many files are going to be stored and how much total room is going to be used. The backup folders themselves are very strange. They are like those junctions. It took me a long time to find them, and even when you find them, you don't have any permissions to go in there. Microsoft doesn't want you going in messing with the backup files. The only thing that can go in there is the system, again, to read the backups. You can, of course, right-click and take ownership and give yourself permissions and look at the files, but they make it very difficult. It takes several steps, and they don't want you messing with them. The backups are now normal zip files. This is really nice. Microsoft, when they turned a corner on security, they also turned a corner on standards compliance. It used to be, well, I remember one of my cases back when I did database administration for the FTC, I had a bunch of it was, in fact, a famous television evangelist. I didn't learn who it was until after it was all over, but I had their records of all the people they stole from by pretending to be a fake charity. And they had a whole database of what lies they told the customers to get money out of them and what lies to tell them next time. And they had the Microsoft Image proprietary backup floppy disks every month. And I had about 40 of those, because this thing went on for years, and I had to extract the data from all that mess. It used to stink. Every backup solution had its own proprietary binary backup form that was incompatible with everything else. Microsoft has wised up, now it's just a plain ordinary zip file. A whole lot better than inventing some new stupid binary method every couple of years, so all your old backups become useless. All right, now system protection is an automatic backup of certain files on your machine, designed just to make it easier to fix your machine when it won't run anymore. In Windows XP, this was called System Restore, and it was only available to fix system files. In Vista and Windows 7, they added your documents to it also, but they added it to it intelligently. If you do a system restore, it does not change in your documents. But the documents are stored in the restore points, and you can get to them with previous versions, if you want to go to a previous version of a document. But, so the system restore is the process that lets you restore your system files back to an earlier date. This is happening because of a shadow copy service. Older operating systems could not copy a file that was in use, but now they can. That's what shadow copy does. It makes a copy of a file even while it's in use. Yeah?
Is the take snapshots, is that the one where you do the file path dot snapshot? You do it like that?
Take a snapshot?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that is. Snapshot? Where is it?
I know like at work when we do, if someone loses a file on a network drive, we do the file path dot snapshot, and then it brings back everything that they've been working on for like the past couple weeks. Is that the same thing on the C drive?
I'm not sure about that. I know the line was previous versions.
Can it be a third party?
It could. I'm wondering if that's a third-party utility.
Well, we do it through the run, or not the run command, but through the search function.
Let's see. Well, this one is here. We go to Properties, and there's a Previous Versions tab, and we'll show you what previous versions are available. They're usually not on this machine because I'm not editing things. I'm not aware of a snapshot for individual files here. I'm wondering if it's another utility.
Okay,
But if you find out, let me know.
for sure.
Yeah. Because yeah.
So if you're watching a movie and if you're watching a movie and you do print screen, and
Yeah.
it takes an image of the screen, is that considered a shadow copy because if all the movies are played, it takes a copy of the image?
No, that's just a copy of one frame.
Okay.
A shadow copy would be a copy of the whole file,
Okay.
even while it's in use. This used to be a serious problem back years ago, and I managed a network really around Windows 98, Windows 2000. Somebody would forget to turn off their machine, and that would mean a file was still in use and it wouldn't go in the backups. And Microsoft fixed that. I think around Vista they got the shadow copy thing working. Might have been in XP too. So it can copy files even if they're in use. The one thing I've always wondered is what if the file is being changed? What do you get? In forensics, when you take an image of something while it's being changed, they call that a smear. And I don't know what you get here. It'd be sort of nice to do a test and find out. Anyway, that's the shadow copy. Windows XP used to make these restore points every day. Windows 7 makes them every 7 days, at least. If they're often more often. They often appear like here's a whole bunch all on the same day. That's because there are events that trigger the creation of a restore point. But if none of those events have occurred for 7 days, it will just make a restore point anyway. So you have at least one restore point per week. So these are things that will provoke the creation of a restore point. When you install anything with a proper Windows installer, MSI file, it will always make a system restore point first before installing it, in case the installation files everything up and you want to go back to before that installation. Windows Update's the same, and every time you do a system restore, to restore your condition of earlier time, the first thing it does is make a restore point where you are. Because system restore fails, I've seen it fail pretty often, like maybe 10 or 20% of the time, where it makes everything worse. And then you want to go back. So since it made a restore point before doing the restore, it can roll back. And every time you make a backup, it makes a system restore point as well. So you can adjust these things. By default, it only monitors the system drive. You could monitor other drives, and then you would have previous versions for files on those drives. You can choose whether you want to monitor system settings or just files. By default, it does them both, but you could choose to only use this for previous versions, and now that I'm beginning to learn more about how lousy system restore is, that might be a good plan. Don't use it, just use image backups or something instead. But I've been using it for years. Most of the time, in practice, it makes things better. If people call, they have a problem, go to system restore, make it the way it was last week, they're usually happy. Realistically, all your Windows systems are in the process of destroying themselves anyway. Realistically, you have to reinstall from zero about every year or two to keep it running. So, it's just like people are getting old and dying. Your machine is gradually making more and more internal errors and corrupting itself, and system restore is just another of the many processes that does that. Every time you install something, when you uninstall it, it typically doesn't come all the way off. It leaves some junk behind in the registry. People call this stuff barnacles. It's like ships get barnacles and they get slower. Windows does gradually destroy itself during normal use. If you look at Event Viewer, you'll find a bunch of errors, and the longer you use your machine, the more errors you'll find. So, if you had an image and just kept restoring right back to the image, then your machine would stay the same. Otherwise, Windows generally ages and destroys itself through all the errors accumulated.
Sam?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm still getting confused in my mind, these different, I know what the options are, but how stable these various options are, right?
Yeah.
So I know the system backup, system image,
Right.
we talked about, right?
Yeah, system image would be perfect, except of course for updates. Every time you roll back, you lost all your updates.
Right. But for system restore, that's taking snapshots.
Well, it's not system restore is rolling back certain files. It's using certain file extensions and backing those up.
So system restore is the one that is unstable.
Yes, system restore is the
that
one-
doesn't restore all the metadata.
That's right. It doesn't restore the metadata, and that's why system restore is not there on servers.
But it's okay for data files.
Oh, it's fine as far as I know for data files. And in practice, and end-user workstations, it is very useful. But the end-user workstations are usually a pretty miserable state anyway. People are getting infected and stuff. So
Yeah, and then for previous versions and shadow copies.
well, the shadow copy is just the
How-
process underneath that makes any of this possible.
Right.
The previous versions are just how you get to your old data files.
So the previous versions are only for data. So
Right.
again, there's no real system, there's no instability. So the only thing
Yeah.
that is really questionable is the system restore.
Yes, exactly. That's it. And that's news to me, but I had a hint because I use system restore all the time. I thought it was wonderful. And every time I teach a class like this, a few of the students would tell me, I never use that, it never works. Every time I go for it, it's not there. And some students are turning in homework and saying, it can't do the restore. It is fairly common that system restore will just not work at all in your system. I assume it has something to do with drivers. Maybe it has something to do with other software that's inconsistent with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a new laptop from HP, and probably about 4 months old now.
Yeah.
I tried to do system restore a couple nights ago, and it told me I had no system restore point previously set up.
Yeah.
And I know I just used system restore 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and I had several. But one
Yeah.
time it just be nice, but I had no previous restore.
Yeah, so maybe the system protection service is turned off. But I've heard this. I've heard a lot of people tell me when you go for it, it's not there.
Yeah.
And when you do it, it'll run through, and then at the end, it will say system restore failed, unable to restore. So it is not perfect at all. Whereas a system image can't fail, I think. You boot from the DVD, restore from an image, I don't know any way that could fail unless your hardware is broken. But this system restore thing is just not as great as I hoped it was. In practice, though, it's the right answer most of the time. So it uses up 5% of the disk, or on small volumes, 3% of the disk. Just quite a lot of your disk is used by all these services. And the files are stored in this thing called C, system volume information, which again is one of those things like the junctions that won't even open. You're not supposed to mess with it. You don't have any. Everyone is denied full control to it, and you probably don't really want to go in there except just for interest. And another really strange thing, which I couldn't believe until I tried it, when Vista came out, it got such bad press that I didn't trust it as my only OS, so I made an XP Vista dual boot. This was a fairly common thing to do. And what happens is every time you boot to Windows XP, all your Vista restore points are gone instantly. And I didn't believe this. I tried it, and it's true. And the reason it happens is because there are different versions of NTFS. This is not, you don't notice it, but each version of Windows uses a slightly different disk format. And what changes is the journal. NTFS is a journaling file system. Every time your operating system is doing something, it's writing, okay, I'm copying a file to the disk, I'm on block 1, I'm on block 2. It has a log of everything it's doing, so that if the power fails, or it crashes, when it boots back up, it just doesn't have to do what Windows 98 did. Every time you reboot a Windows 98 that crashed, it would say, lost clusters found on the disk, and you have to wait 10 minutes while this progress bar goes by. Well, it sweeps all these lost clusters into files on the root of C called 0000 and file 001 and file 002, because it would be halfway through some kind of write operation, crash. When it booted back up, it would have no idea what it was doing. It would find these fragments of files on the disk with no clue of what they were. Windows NT will not do that. NTFS won't. It has a journal, so it can say, here's what I was doing here, I was halfway through it, that's what this is, so now I can just pick up where I left off. That makes it recovered more smoothly than most crashes, but unfortunately there are versions of the journal, and the version of the journal used by Vista and Windows 7 is later than the version of the journal used by Windows XP. So if you have two drives, this is what I couldn't believe. I had a C drive, and I'll put Windows XP on there. Then I'll have a D drive with Windows 7. And I boot to D and use Windows 7 and make restore points. As soon as I boot to C, as soon as the C drive touches the D drive, just to assign a drive letter, you've got my computer, and there's C, and then there's D. Just having it appear in this list means Windows XP has touched the drive, and when it tries to put the drive in here, it checks to see what journal format it has, and finds out that it has a later NTFS journal format, which is not compatible with XP, and it downgrades it to the previous journal format, which deletes the entries that have the restore points. So the only way to preserve your restore points is to pull the cable out inside the box so that XP never even sees that drive. If it sees it at all, it kills your restore points. That's true. Yeah?
But Windows 7 doesn't take back guys when it boots?
It does. When Win 7 comes back, I think it's probably backward compatible. Probably can accept older versions. That's usually the way it is. Later version can usually coexist with the older version, but the older version cannot understand the new version. So, but that's a strange fact, but it does give you kind of a clue of the weird things that are going on behind the scenes. Those restore points have a considerable amount of strange features. You can see how this restore technology is not quite finished. Right, but system restore is generally the best answer for anybody if there's some kind of new problem. So they installed a new game or something, and for some reason the machine doesn't work, maybe some update, or just for no apparent reason your machine just doesn't work anymore. You can just load in system restore and make it the way it was last week or the week before, and 90% of the time that solves your problem. And this way you don't have to have useless, one of the most useless things tech support can do is to ask you, what did you do? Asking the end user what they did is a waste of, they'll all say, oh, I didn't do anything, you know. Even if they did something, they probably were doing something they weren't supposed to do, so they're not going to tell you. Anyway, so you go start restore, and then you look at restore points, and you should see a bunch of them available, and you can just choose any of these to go to. All right, the restore process is reversible, like I say. You can undo a restore, because it makes a restore point before it uses it, and but you cannot interrupt it. One thing that would be kind of entertaining as tech support would be to find the power and pull the power out halfway through the restore and see what you end up with. I haven't done that, but it'd be an educational thing to do that and try to recover from that mess you create. So this means any system files that you changed are going to go back to the earlier versions. So if you created a user account in the last week and you restore a week back, that user account will not work anymore. Their profile is still there, but they can't log in because the SAM entries required to process their password are gone. And if you make a new account with the same name and same password, it will make a new profile and they won't have their old files in there, so you'll have to move them over. So be aware of that. It doesn't really uninstall programs. It doesn't run the uninstaller. It just rolls the system files back. So if you install software and run system restore back to the time before you installed the software, there are fragments of that software left. The folders will be there, the text files, the help files, but the executable files will vanish. So it's kind of weird. It doesn't really cleanly remove programs. It just sort of like blasts them with a shotgun. Gets rid of like 3/4 of them. And anything you did when the system protection service was not running will not be recorded and will not roll back. So if you boot, if you choose repair this computer after F8 and go into the Windows recovery environment and open a command prompt and change things, those changes are not being recorded in system restore. So those changes will not be undone. Let's see. These are the gotchas of system restore. You can do a system restore in safe mode. If your machine won't start up at all, you can boot to safe mode and perform a restore, but safe mode turns off all non-essential services, like system protection. It's not running. So it's not recording what you do, so it can't create a restore point. So if you do a system restore in safe mode, you cannot undo that system restore. That's kind of a desperation move. All right. Now I got a few eye-clicker questions. Come grab one if you need one. I must say, I love all these Windows repair features. I really miss them in Linux. When you mess up Linux, you're kind of on your own. When you mess up Windows, there are so many handy ways to automatically fix it. I really am glad they're there.
What? No,
Don't use the driver's license. Just put your name on a piece of paper. Driver's license. There was, yeah. There was a pen here too. Don't use that to my table. Just write your name on a piece of paper. Steve, identity stolen in class, that's embarrassing. So, and every now and then someone does take someone else's ID, but if it's only a student ID, it's not too bad. All right, which of these do you not get in starter? So I'll quit at 30. All right, and you can't back up to a network drive. That's it. You'll remember that. Good. All right. Which of these will help you recover from virus infection? And that is image backup. Is the only thing that will recover. And the common mistake people make is they run a system restore because they got a virus. Now that will replace some system files and your machine might run better, but it doesn't really get the virus on it. And it will probably just deteriorate on you again. A real image restore is the real perfect solution. Then you throw everything away, restart with a clean copy, and that will really get rid of the malware. All right, switch these will make a damaged system run again without losing your documents. Do it at 30. All right. So image restore will make the system run again, but you'll lose all your documents. File backup will bring back your files, but it won't make the system run again. This is the only one that has that property. That's why I think it's wonderful. For most of the time, system restore is what people want. They want the machine to run again, but don't lose my documents. All right. So which of these will make a copy of your whole system on a new computer? You can use it to deploy Windows. Good. All right, that's that image backup. It doesn't send it out over the network like Ghost, but you can do it you can use it to copy a machine one copy at a time. And which one of these does not trigger a restore point creation? Put it at 30. All right, and unfortunately, deleting a file does not trigger a restore point creation. By the way, this isn't a fun fact to know. Previous versions does not save you from accidentally deleting your file because there's no file to click on to go to properties to go to previous version. Deleting a file loses the trail. So that's nasty. If you delete a file and you want it back, your only options are your file backups or the recycle bin. Previous versions is not there for you. Anyway, let's take a break till 10 after 10. Let you stretch your legs. He's like painting the floor, and he comes up and talks to Dilbert, and he's, what are you doing? He said, I'm removing valuable features from our product so we can ring the customers for the upgrades. He said, there's not much job satisfaction in your job, is there? But that's what they did. They made this thing called Starter by just removing valuable features to drive you nuts until you pay for upgrade to home premium. Anyway, so you can't play DVDs on your Starter, and you can't change the background. It's going to have an ad for Microsoft, and you can't get rid of it and stuff like that. Also, Home Basic can't play DVDs, but Home Basic is not sold in America, so that's not too relevant to us. Anyway, all media files come in container formats. There are many different formats. This is the baby of many, many people that make videos and such, like he's doing. There are many incompatible video players and video formats, and the worst thing is the codecs. For example, the AVI, which is Microsoft Windows native format, has an unlimited number of compression decompression routines, and if you download 10 movies and try to play them, 1 or 2 out of the 10 will not play because you don't have the right codec, and it can be very difficult to find. Yeah.
On your schedule, you don't say you're doing this chapter.
Did I skip it? Oh, didn't mean to skip it. Maybe I decided to cut it out this semester. I think it was telling me. I might.
Anybody else notice that?
Yeah, I think I did.
I was going to cut it out. Maybe I'm getting kind of fed up with it actually. Let's see.
Yeah, I knew it was something too.
I'm glad you reminded me, because I still have it in my slides, but maybe I intended to cut it out.
I was like, I didn't read this.
Didn't I skip it? Is this 12? I thought I jumped right ahead to 15. Is this 12? Oh, I think you're telling me. That stinks. Good, let's get rid of that. Let's move on to 15. 15 is a lot more fun.
Yeah, I was like, that's like nothing.
Well, I don't mind, but I think then we're going to run out of time at some point.
Yeah, but
That's good. No, that's fine. There's better things to cover. Well, I think. Don't let me make a fool of myself any more than necessary up here. All right, so security, which
So
is
the
lots more
quiz
fun.
is going to be on 11 and 15 too.
What's that?
The quiz is going to be on 11 and 15 too.
And 15, well, I think. Good. I appreciate the help.
Excuse me, so,
Oh, I just don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah, 11 and 15.
are you gonna cover 5, 4,
No, we're going to skip that stuff. Because that stuff is not on the certificate.
It took me a few minutes to
I'm
get
glad
on.
you told me. I was fed up with that stuff, why we're still doing it. All right, so security. You've got Action Center is Microsoft's new panel in Windows 7 to remind you of the important things you have to do. It'll bug you if you haven't done updates, if your firewall is turned off. I got sort of fed up with that until I saw a study that actually proved that the firewall makes an enormous difference. They took a Windows XP machine with no firewall, connected to the internet, and the thing was infected within hours. And if you just turn on the default firewall, it lasts for a year before it gets infected. So it is surprising how much security you get just from a simple firewall. It'll also bug you about antivirus and anti-spyware. So this is the same in all of everything here is the same in every version except for group policy settings, which is of course only available in the business editions. Yeah.
Why is it only a year for the firewall?
Oh, the firewall lasts forever. This is just an experimental measure of how long you can connect before it will get infected. I was just surprised it made a difference because I always turn off the firewall and never turn it back on because I'm always doing crazy networking things. So viruses are pretty much over, actually. The actual viruses went around on floppy disks attached to executable files. Most of the things that are actually infecting people now are probably more accurately described as worms or Trojans, but virus took root as the popular term in the media and such. When people talk about viruses, what they really mean is malware, anything bad that you don't want on your machine. Anyway, so worms travel through instant message and email. Viruses travel by infecting executable files every time you run them, which is not the most common way it's done anymore. Spyware, the province of Google, is stuff that watches everything you do and reports back to the home office. Google does this by staying just barely legal, stooping on you as much as possible, and the criminals use the really nasty stuff that does things like steal your passwords, which Google does not dare to do. And malware is the general category that includes all these things, and Trojans. Trojans are the most common ones. Remote access Trojans, rats, are files that take remote control of your machine, like Windows Remote Desktop, and now criminals using your machine to do something nasty, like send out spam or distribute child pornography or something, and that's called a botnet, and there are tons and tons of them. I was just last week contacting people as part of the latest WordPress botnet. In April of this year, a new attack came out which guessed passwords to get into WordPress blogs, and it had 90,000 WordPress sites infected, and they've begun attacking people with it. I've got the logs from one of the attacks, thousands and thousands of WordPress blogs attacking this website. There are many uses of botnets. Once you take over, say, 100,000 machines, how do you make money? The most simple, valuable way to make money is to send spam with it. Another good thing you can do is mine bitcoins. That's getting popular. Just turns processor time into money. And another thing you can do is denial of service attacks. People will pay money. The most common reason is because you're in the same business. So if you sell shoes, you do a DOS attack to take down your competitor's website so the traffic will come to you. This is very common. Anyway.
Excuse me, what's that rootkit?
What's that?
Rootkit.
What's that?
Rootkit?
Yeah, rootkits. Rootkits are infections that infect the heart of the system and that cannot be easily detected. They hide things. So they're the nastiest kind of software because you can't detect it to uninstall it. Your antivirus won't see it. It's almost impossible to get off. So Sony got in a world of trouble when they used rootkit technology to enforce copy protection in 2005 on their music. So if you put on the Sony player, it would make permanent system changes and you couldn't get it off. And that turned into a huge lawsuit because it had bugs in it and it opened security holes in the machine you couldn't patch. So, rootkits are the nastiest thing. That's why rootkits are probably the main reason why I keep saying make system images, because you don't want to try to get a rootkit off your system. You will just struggle until you get fed up with it. You just restore from your image backup. That's the way to get a rootkit off your system. So Windows Firewall in Windows 7 now has the ability to filter outgoing traffic, but it's turned off by default. This is not what Microsoft wanted. There's a lot of outgoing traffic from your machine that is obviously garbage. Your machine is sending out 1,000 emails in a minute. Your machine is doing port scans. If your machine is sending out packets with false from addresses, obviously none of those are legitimate packets, and your firewall ought to block them. But Microsoft doesn't. They said they would in Vista, and HP and other major corporations complained and said, we can't tolerate that because we have custom applications that send unusual network traffic, and we don't want to have to open the firewall to make that work. So by default, it doesn't filter any outgoing traffic, no matter how obviously rotten it is, which is a shame. So Windows machines are selfish. They protect themselves, but they have no protection against hurting other people. This is the way they've been for a long time. And it also means you can trivially defeat a Windows firewall. You have to get someone to ask for the attack. That's why almost all Windows attacks want you to click on a link. If you ask for something, it will go right through the firewall. If it just comes and you haven't asked for it, the firewall will bounce it. User account control is enormously valuable. This means you're not running as administrator all the time the way people did in Windows XP. You're running logged in with an administrative account, but you're running with low privileges, and you only escalate to administrator when you choose to approve it. I guess there's a football game starting, or a horse race or something. Right, so there's Windows Defender is their anti-spyware technique, anti-spyware included, and IE has a lot of new features. I've talked about these before. Protected mode prevents your system from being changed. And Smart Screen warns you about known malicious websites. And it has this in-private browsing, if you want to use it, that will stop Google from tracking you. And it has a biometric service, so you can put fingerprint scanners on machines. It's just built into Windows. There have been third-party fingerprint readers. A lot of these fingerprint readers are actually implemented in a terrible way. And the same thing's true of Microsoft's picture password. It has your password, and when you pass the test, it types your password in. So the end result is you have a much less secure system than ever because now it's stored your password in plain text. This is poorly thought out systems. So you now have BitLocker and BitLocker to go, of course, to encrypt things, and parental controls. So you can specify what children.
Who
What's
uses
that?
that biometric? I've only seen it like at the banks and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I've got a laptop with a biometric scanner, and now it's on the iPhone. It's becoming more common to have a fingerprint reader on machines. And,
They won't be able to break that or,
oh no, it's completely hackable. Like the new one on the iPhone, they hacked it within like 12 hours. It is trivial. The old technique's been using for 20 years. You get a fingerprint, take a photograph of it, and put it on like, print it, and then just lick the paper so it's a little bit damp. And that'll fool almost any fingerprint reader. So fingerprints are not perfect, but the point is, if you were to store, the whole point of two-factor authentication is not that it's perfect, but that it's two independent factors. So if I hack into a server and I get a database of a million passwords, if I need all those fingerprints too, I really can't get much good out of those passwords. So even an imperfect system where it's not too hard to forge a fingerprint will still be a whole lot better than just a password alone. But the fingerprint alone, without also a password, is probably a pretty miserable authentication system, but it's convenient for the user. In practice, this means you can log in and your people that pick up your phone can't log right in. So,
who uses that? I've only seen it like at the banks or.
yeah, most people won't want to use it. They give it to you.
Biometric uses it for the military.
Yep. Yeah, any kind of high security is an option, but it's not that common. You're right. One good thing about it is you can't forget your password. But the other thing is you can't change your password either. So, it's got problems. But it's good to have the alternative. Anyway, there's a redirection service in Windows which will virtualize changes made by standard users. So if a standard user tries to install something and tries to change something, sometimes it will put those in the local load folders the way it does in Internet Explorer. And it has some buffer overrun protection, which is very nice. Buffer overflows are probably the most common software vulnerability, where you take something like a password field that's only supposed to be 10 letters long, and you put in 10,000 letters. So the data you put in is going on a stack. You have memory here from, say, 0 to 4 gigabytes. You have your memory. And in here, there's a stack. There's room here for your password. And you put in a really long password that overflows that. And in that password, you put an egg. And the egg is software that gives someone remote control. If this runs, it will open a network connection and let the bad guy control your machine. So you put it in your password, and then you put an address in your password, which will jump and execute the egg. This is how people typically take over machines with buffer overruns. This means you have to know where you are in memory. So address-based layout randomization means every time you launch, if you have MS-DOS, and you have some memory here, you'll start at DOS here, then you'll start maybe Word, and maybe an Internet Explorer or something, and this is the way it works. The operating system always is at the bottom of memory, the next application is always right here, the next application is always right here, so you can pretty much guess where you're going to be in memory. Address-based layout randomization means every time you launch it, it puts it in a different location in memory. IE is down there, next time you restart, IE goes down here, IE goes here. So it makes it hard for the bad guy to execute their code, because they don't know what address to jump to find the code they've injected. It sounds good. It does lower the efficiency of attacks. The Microsoft implementation is in fact highly flawed. For example, in Vista, it didn't affect Internet Explorer. It only affected other parts of the operating system. And even when it got improved in Windows 7, it only has 1 byte of randomness. So it only moves it to 256 random locations. So all you have to do is run your attack 300 times. And you'll get lucky once. But anyway, it is defense to some extent against buffer overflows. And in practice, it does make most of that kind of attack much less efficient. 64-bit Windows 7, as we mentioned, will prevent you from using unsigned drivers, which is a big improvement for Microsoft. When your machine crashes, it has a box to pop up, please tell Microsoft about this problem. They get millions of the crash reports, and they found out that I think 70% of the blue screens of death of Windows are caused by third-party device drivers. Microsoft gets blamed, and they didn't even write that code, so they're getting really fed up with it. If you write a driver, Microsoft would like you to send it to them and let them test it and give you this stamp of approval. You pay a few $100, and then you get the ability to put on your box, designed for Windows 7. That's logo testing. That's what Microsoft wants you to do. And if you run a 64-bit system, they will require all drivers to be signed. They don't all have to be logo tested and approved by Microsoft, but at least they have to be signed by a certificate so they can't be altered and have malware added to them. Anyway, and there's an ability to control USB drives in group policy in Windows 7, which is a good thing. You can just block them in group policy or limit them to only your company-approved USB drives, which is an attempt to try to stop all your data leaking out of the country, leaking out of your company, the way it did with Bradley Manning leaking out military secrets. copying stuff to a removable device. So Action Center shows you the state of your system, and if you have a commercial firewall that is appropriate for Windows 7 or commercial antivirus, it will tell this panel the truth, and so it will know if your antivirus is installed and if it's up to date. If you have some cheap off-brand antivirus like the free stuff, it may not appear here, and that's why you have an option to just turn off the monitoring. Quit complaining, telling me I don't have any virus. I've got one, it's just one that doesn't tell Action Center that it's there. All right, by the way, you shouldn't run 2 antivirus programs, although I've had some students tell me they're able to do this these days, but in the old days you couldn't run 2 with real-time protection like Norton and McAfee. If you put them both on at the same time, your machine will stop. Because what will happen is you try to open a file and Norton says, wait, before you open that file I have to scan it, and McAfee says, wait, before Norton scans that I have to scan it, and they argue about who's the boss. So you don't usually want 2 real-time antivirus programs. You can have a real-time and a non-real-time like ClamWin, and you can have as many firewalls as you want, you can have as many anti-spyware as you want, because those aren't as invasive. But antiviruses hook into the system at the kernel level, and they tend to conflict with each other. This is a real problem because the manufacturers sell people machines with like 30-day free trials of Norton, which is stupid, because customers just let that expire, and then they have no antivirus at all. When they try to put one on, they don't know they have to take Norton off first. So it's pretty rude, and that's why Microsoft is now making their own hardware. They're finally getting fed up with the fact that when you actually buy a Windows machine, you have a miserable experience because the OEMs have filled it with garbage. Microsoft writes good stuff, and then what they sell you is actually junk. Anyway, you should run a personal firewall. Even if you're at work and your company is protected by a firewall, that was Microsoft's recommendation in 2001. But now you need a firewall all the time because the people next to you could be the source of the infection, because everybody's carrying around infected USB sticks and laptops and iPads and everything, bringing in God knows what from the outside. Yeah?
On the previous slide,
Yeah.
you had 2 firewalls, is okay, but
Yeah.
hard to manage?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on why that's hard to manage?
Oh, just if you want to open a port, you're going to have to open it both. That's all. Yeah, and so I had some people say they love to have 2 firewalls. I don't know any pros that do that. Firewalls are usually strong enough.
But as opposed to, when you say firewalls, you mean,
People actually run 2 firewall softwares on the same machine.
oh, software?
Yeah, 2
firewall.
software firewalls on the same machine.
Oh.
That's kind of screwy. There's no
But
real
you
reason
would
for it.
have a hardware firewall
would.
and then software, and then
Yes.
Windows firewall?
Yes, absolutely. Your whole company will have a hardware firewall protecting you all from internet threats, and then each machine will have a software firewall protecting you from your neighbor. That's the recommended procedure. Yeah. Good.
Excuse me, so it's recommended, for example, to have also a firewall at home?
Yes, you should be running a firewall at home too. And Windows will do it by default now. The Windows firewall is okay. Even in a home location, the firewall will be running, but it will allow through things that you turned on, like file sharing. But it will stop things you didn't ask for from coming on your machine.
What is it?
It'll stop, unexpected packets will not be allowed to come into your machine. The firewall's on. That's the main thing it does. This is what happened in Windows 2000 is people got infected by TFTP. Trivial File Transfer Protocol is used to upload firmware to phones and routers, and Windows 2000 was listening. So you could just send a file over the network and it would go right on your machine without you opening a box or clicking or anything. That's what firewalls prevent.
Yeah, but I was thinking about it. So that's the same thing that the companies use, like Glassdoors?
What's that?
That's the same thing that some companies use on firewall.
Yes.
Is that also recommended to use it?
Yes. Yeah, it is recommended to have a firewall turned on your router and also on each machine. Yeah.
When the file is sent in transfer or email,
Yeah.
isn't it encoded? Or so it can't punch the file?
Yes. Blocking email attachments is not something a simple firewall normally does. That's a higher level firewall, and usually don't have that at home. But your email service may block it.
But I mean, it has to scan the zip file. The zip file is encoded.
Well, zip files aren't encrypted though. Some layer 7 firewalls will look inside zip files now, usually. But that's not a simple firewall. You're kidding. That's a deep packet inspection firewall at that point. All right, so you should be running a personal firewall. That's a good idea. And the Windows firewall is a stateful firewall. This has turned out to be a very good idea. It's very simple. See, if you install third-party stuff like Zone Alarm, it will keep popping up boxes asking you whether to let this thing through or not. Windows will never do that. It just runs a stateful firewall. It looks to see if you have asked for this package, then it comes through. If you sent some kind of request to Yahoo, then when Yahoo responds to that, whatever they send is let through. If you didn't send a request from Yahoo and Yahoo sends you something, it bounces. That's a stateful firewall. It never has to ask you any questions. What it means is you can be a client but not a server. If you were a server, like a file server, then somebody will ask to see the file and you didn't ask them. So if the firewall is set to not allow exceptions, this is what happens if you're on public locations. The Windows firewall prevents you from being a server at all. But you can still be a client, and that's what most people want. If you're at home or at work, then the exceptions are allowed, and the services you turned on are permitted through the firewall. So when you turn on file sharing, it opens the file sharing point and lets unexpected requests in on just that port. But other services are not turned on. So it turned out to be a good idea, and it has the convenience feature that it never is going to pop up a box asking you questions on normal course of events, unless you turn on a new service. Then it might ask you whether you want to open the firewall. So it is capable of filtering outgoing traffic, but it doesn't by default. And it has the advanced firewall console, which has a lot of settings. If you type in firewall, here's Windows Firewall with advanced security. This is the new one. This is as complicated as a Cisco router. You've got inbound rules, and there are dozens and dozens of them. And you got outbound rules. And these things are disabled rules and those are enabled rules. So for example, if you wanted your machine to answer pings, which it does not by default, then you have to find it here, and I think it's core networking, file and printer sharing, ICM, file and printer sharing echo request, ICMP version 4 in. You can enable this rule and then your machine will answer pings. And there are 3 firewall profiles, domain, public, and private. So you have 2 of these. This is for private and public, and that's for domain. So it really is quite a chore to answer pings. In Windows XP, there's just a checkbox in a tab in the properties of your network connection to allow pings. In Windows 7, they didn't make it easy. You have to hunt this far to find out how to answer a ping. If you turn off the firewall, it will answer a ping, of course, but then you don't get any protection. If you want to answer ping and have the rest of the features, then you enable these rules.
What was that address again?
What's that?
The ping. What was that address again for the ping?
Well, it's not an address, but I've got to get that firewall thing
Yeah,
up again, which I don't think I closed. There it is. Okay, it's file and printer sharing echo request. I don't know why Microsoft thinks it's file and printer sharing, but that's what it is.
And they have it for IP version 4 and IP version 6.
They do, yes, version 4 and version 6, and separately for different profiles. So yeah, that's where you let pings through if you want to.
Yeah.
All right. And you can also turn on outbound filters there if you want to, but they're all off by default. So here's the profiles. If you join a domain with the domain controller, then you're in the domain profile. And that means typically your firewall settings are controlled by the domain controller, although not necessarily. A private network is either home or work. Then your firewall by default will allow exceptions, which means Windows services you've turned on, like remote desktop and file sharing, will open ports in the firewall. In public, all ports are closed. You are, no unexpected packets are allowed in. You can only be a client, but not a server. Anything you ask for, you can get, but anything you didn't ask for bounces off the firewall. That's what you want in a public place like a coffee house. Even if you have shared files, you don't want anybody in that coffee house going in your shared files. All right, so that's the game there. By the way, if you have 2 network connections, like a wired connection and a wireless connection at the same time, then each connection will be separately filtered by the right rule, which is nice. That's better than Vista. And here's one thing that gets people about home groups. If you turn on home groups, but you have any network connection that is not type home, the home groups won't work. So if you have multiple network cards, you have to be aware of that when you're doing home groups. Yeah?
I talked to you about this the first week of class, but in my work, I was getting tripped up with the public-private domain network locations, because when we're building new PCs, and before you add it to the domain, when you're just first choosing the various settings, it makes you choose a setting, and basically the default is public.
Yeah.
You can't get away from that, so your computer has a public profile for the firewall. And then you join it to the domain, and at least on my domain, it takes a while for it to locate the forest domain controller. I think that's the reason, but it takes a while to do something. And so even though you join the domain and it acts like it's on the domain, in terms of the firewall location, the network location, that the profile that assigns it, it still says public. And so then the firewall acts accordingly. So you have to leave it on for a certain amount of time or you have to make sure that the different profile, more than one profile is set. And then eventually it just, on its own, it recognizes it's a domain and it just does it by itself.
That's a good thing to know. That's very common, by the way. The domain features take a long time to take effect. Anyway, by the way, one other thing I want to mention, this was an XP Service Pack 2 improvement. The previous firewall before XP Service Pack 2 was a service that didn't start at startup. So when your network connection would come up, there would be a period of several seconds before the firewall came on. And there was an infection called bugbear that infected everybody. It was really nasty. It would hide in the printer. It would hide on network shares. You'd think you'd clean, so people would re-ghost all the machines, turn them on, but the printer would still be infected. And when they came up with a brand newly installed Windows 2000, or XP before Service Pack 2, it would turn on the network card, and before the firewall came on, it would already be infected again. What's that? That was the infection was called bugbear.
So then how did you fix it then?
They fixed it with Service Pack 2 by making the firewall turn on before the network card turns on. That was a fundamental security flaw. And I assume the modern firewall has the same property. I haven't heard of that kind of thing happening again. So the simple Windows firewall tool just lets you turn it on and off and open a port if you want to. The advanced security one I just showed you lets you go into great detail and configure everything you want about firewall. And you can also control your group policy if you're on a domain, if you have a business version, or even if you're not on a domain, local security policy. You can also use NetSH commands. The command line is very good. Ever since Windows XP, Microsoft has been committed to making sure everything can be done in the command line. For a while they tried to imitate Apple and make you use the mouse, and network administrators complained and said, I need to script everything because I have 10,000 machines. So everything you possibly want to do can be done in the command line and put in a script. What's that? What about it? What's that?
That's what it's supposed to be. That's what it's supposed to use. That's XP.
MMC? Oh, MMC is
XP. Windows XP.
Windows XP. What about it?
Microsoft Management Console.
Yeah, what about it?
So that's what most people use in XP.
Well, it's been around, I think, it's in 2000, Microsoft Management Console. It's now in the 3rd version. Yeah, you use it for almost everything. You are, in fact, using it when you use computer management or a whole variety of tools. Many Microsoft tools are actually MMC. So you can see your status. You can turn it on and off in the typical Windows firewall tool. And you can customize settings. This is the most common place, turning it on or off. If you turn it off, then it has no effect on network traffic at all. If you turn it on, but you allow exceptions, then it will block any unexpected traffic except ones that ports have been specifically opened, which happens automatically for Windows services like file sharing and remote desktop. All right, and if you, of course, like I said before, but if you want to turn it, the way it goes in public networks by default is turn on and block all incoming connections. And that means you can only be a client, you can't be a server at all. All right, so like I say, exceptions are when you turn on something like games, remote desktop, file runs, and printer sharing, and those you'll see in your allowed programs. Let me just bring it up here, let's see what's allowed on this machine. Firewall. And if I go turn it on or off, I'm here, and if I want to see my exceptions, those should be allow a programmer feature through Windows Firewall. And there we are. So the Add-Aware Security Add-on DTX Broker is permitted, whatever in the world that is. APA Studio, BlackBerry, Bonjour, that's iTunes, Core Networking, Dropbox. These are things that are permitted through the firewall. And you'll play with this in the lab. You usually set up Netcat Listener and you have to open a port in the firewall and let it through. All right. You can add things by port number or by program. And if you turn on a new listening service, a box will pop up asking you whether you want to let it through the firewall. Unfortunately, this will only happen the first time you turn it on. So this is the only case in which it acts like the nasty firewalls like Zone Alarm, where it asks the user a question that they may not understand, and if they give the wrong answer, you've made a problem that's hard to fix. You're going to have to go in that panel where I just went to find that program and allow it through. And that happens in the lab, in the project where you do an Sept in-cat listener. Yeah.
I made a note, something I read when I was reading, it said that program rules are created but not enabled when a program tries to set up an incoming connection.
They're created, but then the answer to this box determines whether they're enabled.
Right, that's what I
And
thought.
so if you say no, then the program rule is in there, so next time you start listening,
You
it
can
won't
turn
pop up.
it, you can
It
go
won't
back,
pop, you can go back and it won't pop up the box again. That's what's annoying.
but you
So
could go back and
Yeah.
change that.
that's what happens, because some students will go in the lab and try to do this project where you start an in-cat listener and the box pops up, but a previous student has already done the lab on that machine, so the box won't pop up. So be aware that these pop-up box things and firewalls are a pretty miserable way to do it. Microsoft has gotten away from it. Asking the end user what to do is usually a very poor security plan, because the end user usually has no idea what you're talking about. They just want to get this box off the screen like a fly, and they'll just click something random to get it to go away. And then call tech support, and when you say, what did you do? They'll say, I didn't do anything.
Oh, yeah. Lousy.
And because some box popped up with some dribble in it that means nothing, which is my daily experience. Every time I turn on my machine, 10 boxes pop up and I have no idea what they mean. I just sweep them out of the way and try to get my work done. Anyway, all right, we talked about the advanced security. So let's do a few eye clickers here. Which one of these makes your machine a bot? Where's my eye clicker? I am not listening to the eye clickers yet because somehow I've lost the app. There it is. Okay, it failed to come to the front. All right, now I'm listening. Oh, okay, sure. Pardon me. Okay. I'll wait till 35. All right, those are rats, remote access Trojans. They're the most popular, that's typically what makes you a bot. What threat only operates when attached to an executable?
Wait, I think you clicked C as a correct answer.
Oh, did I do it wrong, Mark Gardner? I'll go back and fix it after this, thank you. Don't let me get the wrong one. That would be bad. Quit at 30. All right, and that is a virus. That's a classical version of virus. Now let's check the previous one. Ooh, you're right. Thank you. Good.
Can I get points for that too?
Yeah. That's perfectly fine. I'm glad you're telling me. All right. Which one of these will pop up boxes asking for user approval of risky actions? Quick on 30. All right, that's user account control. Yep, popular answer. Not Windows Defender, user account control does that. All right, which one of these protects your company from losing data on USB drives? Okay. That's BitLocker to go, encrypts your USB drive. BitLocker encrypts the hard drive, BitLocker to go is the USB drive encryption. BitLocker encrypts your hard drive, BitLocker to go encrypts USB drives.
Oh,
Which one of these requires signed drivers? All right, and they call that patch guard. That's the name of the technology requiring signed drivers in the 64-bit version. Which one of these lets you block video games? That's, of course, parental controls. Protect your children from managing games. And which one will protect your company from losing data when they get stolen laptops?
Oh, yeah.
Which is a really big threat. 50,000 laptops a year at San Francisco Airport alone. They just pile them up and auction them off, pallets at a time.
Wow.
Including one of mine. All right, and that's BitLocker. BitLocker encrypts your laptop, everyone knows that, which is awesome. All right, well, there's a little more here. So, Windows Update is, of course, super important because Microsoft has a bunch of known problems, and if you don't patch them quickly, the worms follow. There's Patch Tuesday followed by Exploit Wednesday, as the bad guys reverse engineer the patches. There's lots of antivirus out there. In my opinion, Microsoft Security Essentials is probably the best, but I don't have any problem with getting infected with malware. And the main thing about Security Essentials is it won't slow your machine down very much. McAfee and Norton probably offer more protection, but they really slow down your machine and they cost money. You can get a free copy of McAfee from the college if you want to.
What about Avast?
On the Mac, you should run antivirus. It doesn't really matter which one. And then you don't have to worry about them slowing down the Mac either, because there's almost no viruses in the database. But it is important because Macs are not safe anymore. I used to use Sophos, but it wasn't much good, and I switched to Avast on the Mac. But there's about 10 free ones on the Mac now. Yeah.
Professional version?
The version you get from here is actually the enterprise version, which is for big business. So it's not the kind you get at home. And it is free. You get one copy per student if you want it. It will protect your machine a lot, but it'll also slow it down a lot. It'll add 45 seconds to start up and shut down, and a lot longer than that every time it boots up and updates the definitions. It's quite a heavy protection. Malicious software removal tool has been around for a while. This is it comes with Windows Update, and it removes just certain infections that are popular. It doesn't clean everything, but it automatically cleans certain things, and it reports it back to Microsoft, and Microsoft uses it to measure the quality of their protections. McAfee Stinger is another similar tool from McAfee, which will just remove certain popular infections like browser hijackers. But like I mentioned, most modern threats, you really can't remove them. You can spend weeks struggling with it. It's a whole lot better to just have an image backup and set some time limit. If I don't get this fixed in one day, I'm just going to restore the backup. Yeah?
What would be the best thing to do if the person that has a problem on their computer never did a system, image backup?
Yeah, then...
What would you do? What
Well,
would
you
be
know...
the next best option?
The next best option would be connect a USB drive and copy their data files, reformat the drive, reinstall, and put everything back. But what the worst case, of course, is your typical clueless home user. They have a bunch of pirate software, they don't have the product keys, they never backed anything up, and of course it's all infected. And then you've got a real problem.
So then even backing up the data wouldn't be...
You back up the data, then they won't have their software anymore.
Right.
So it's a problem. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Macintosh, just as
No, not at all, but it is somewhat. No, there's like, there's 1 million viruses for Android, there's gotta be 100 million for Windows, and there's like 1,000 for Mac. But it's not zero anymore. It used to be zero until about 9 months ago. So you really do need antivirus on your Mac, because there are Trojans out there and other forms of malware infecting. So spyware is stuff that will pop up toolbars and such and report on your information back to another machine. We're getting a lot of these in the lab. A lot of them come through browser toolbars and such. They're pretty annoying. One good way to get them off, by the way, is Revo uninstaller. It's a program that works pretty well.
What is it called?
Revo, R-E-V-O. I've been using that in the lab. Revo uninstaller. It's a nice free product to get rid of these toolbars and such. They're not exactly viruses, but they are nasty and they're irritating.
Very.
Windows Defender is available. This gives you real-time protection from spyware. It'll warn you when harmful things come down. It'll also scan your machine periodically without slowing it down much. And you can turn on or turn off real-time protection, but it's typically there, blocking spyware. User account control means you have 2 tokens. You log in as an account that has administrative privileges. Yeah. But you run with low privileges, and you'll see this prompt every time you elevate to administrator. So if you install an application, that will typically invoke a user account control prompt if it's got an MSI installed. It might not. You might have applications that are just like exe files and they don't know they have to be elevated to administrator, so you actually have to right-click and run as administrator to properly install them. If you put on a device driver or an ActiveX control or change the firewall settings, all these things will prompt you with a user account control prompt. Windows Update, changing account types, all the things you would think. Viewing somebody else's folder, you'll go in a folder and say, you can't get in here. If you want to get in here, you have to take ownership. If you click yes, it'll then ask you to have a user account control prompt. Elevate to administrator to do that. You'll see this shield icon on certain options, and that means that when you click on that, you will probably have to go through user account control escalation. If you don't want to see user account control, you can just turn it off, or you can log in with the administrator account, and then you'll never see them. You'll always be the administrator. That account is disabled by default. You'd have to enable it and then log in as the administrator, but then you could run the way you did in XP, as administrator all the time, always high privilege. It's unsafe, but more convenient. All right, if you're not an administrator account, the user account control box will ask you to give an administrator password. And some actions will fail silently. So that's auto elevation. These are things that will automatically elevate. Programs that are part of Windows, these are things that will not require a prompt to elevate. This is the weakness. Microsoft made user account control weaker in Windows 7 than it was in Windows Vista. There are certain programs on a predefined list that are allowed to escalate silently, and malware does in fact attack and hide in those programs. There are holes through which attacks can come. So user account control in Vista is more secure, but in practice it was so much more annoying that it didn't really protect people because everybody just turned it off. The secure desktop is that gray desktop that appears in the background, and you can turn that off if you want. The purpose of that background is to prevent any other activity from running, because otherwise I could run another program and put another box on top that says, do you want a free iPad? Click here for yes, and you're actually clicking a user account control box and you don't know it. So they want to make sure that no other process can possibly grab the keyboard or the mouse while this is happening. That's what that gray desktop does. Everything else stops while you answer this one question. That was the original purpose of Control-Alt-Delete. The reason you would log in with Control-Alt-Delete is because it would terminate all other processes, like the keylogger, before you type in your password. That was the idea. So you can adjust user account control. Now with just 4 levels, here is the convenient way to adjust it. So by default, second highest is default up here, which is not always notifies like Vista. Every single thing you do requires administrative privileges, will require a prompt. This will only notify you when something is happening that you did not initiate. That's the default. If you go here, it will get rid of the gray desktop, which is what I do so I can catch these screen images, because the print screen key does not work either at that prompt. And this turns it off entirely. Those are enough adjustments for most people. There are detailed adjustments available in group policy down here. After taking these when this first came out, the Microsoft certification classes went through this. You can control it in great detail. You can control whether the built-in administrator will ever see that prompt or not. You can set it so that non-administrators will just always silently fail. They will not get that prompt asking for a password, and so on. You can adjust a lot of things about it in great detail here if you want to, but most people are content with the slider with 4 stops. All right. And like I say, if you want to work around UAC, if you, for example, if you open an administrator command prompt window, everything you do in there will be administrative and you won't ever see any UAC prompts. You can log in as the administrator, and then it's just like XP, everything you're administrator all the time. If you run as a standard user, it won't even offer you most of the options that require administrative privilege, so you won't see as many prompts. These are things to know. You can also use a fingerprint reader instead of a password if you find that more convenient to elevate yourself. So, this I think is not that important because I think not too many people are turning UAC off in Windows 7. In Windows Vista, Microsoft had a big PR problem, and they made a big deal out of trying to convince people to leave UAC on, because everybody pretty much just turned it off. But almost nobody used Vista anyway, so that wasn't that big of a problem. It was the warm-up to Windows 8. All right, so a few eye clickers, and I think that's it for today. So which feature prevents Windows 7 from responding to pings? I'm clicking at 30. All right, and that's the firewall, of course. Ever since Windows XP Service Pack 2, Windows machines no longer answer pings. You cannot ping a network block to find machines anymore. You won't find the Windows machines. All right, which feature prevents attackers from tricking users into clicking on UAC prompts by mistake? That's the secure desktop, that gray desktop. That's what it's there for. Prevents any other process from drawing anything or receiving the mouse clicks or keyboard presses. Which feature is not included in a fresh install of Windows 7? All right, that is the antivirus, Security Essentials. It's finally included in Windows 8, but no other version of Windows ever included antivirus by default. And which feature will warn you if you turn off the firewall? All right, and that's the Action Center. See, good. All right, that's you got the most right. Now I'll go up to the lab and help you. Anybody needs anything? Don't come next week. There's no class. Go to code camp instead.